Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to the fourth day of the Awakening Summit. So happy that you are here. And I am so excited to be talking to Jem Miner, who owns Nourishing Alchemy. Welcome, Jem.
Thanks, Hollis.
So happy that you're here and hope everybody's enjoying the summit. I personally been getting to meet incredible people and just totally inspiring. So I'm just going to say a little bit about Jem first, and then we're going to dive into our conversation. So she has many titles amongst her, but she is an acupuncturist, qigong, and sacred embodiment coach. And what's amazing to me too is she just had a baby days ago. So yay for being here.
Yes.
So today we're going to be talking a lot about, our topic is really about thriving beyond trauma and clearing the stuckness. And I love what you said in your book, which was clearing past trauma on a cellular level. So can you tell us what that means, please?
Yeah, so in the Taoist theory of embodiment of how we hold energy in the body, we don't really separate body, mind, spirit. They're all one thing. And so how we work with trauma and how it gets held in the body, in our actual cellular tissues, in Chinese medicine, is really different than how we work with trauma in, traditional, talk therapy, etc. And to come back into the body, into the cellular level of how we've been holding these patterns. Sometimes it's, just from our lifetime, and sometimes it's from generations. So there's all this research now coming out about intergenerational trauma, how that's passed on to our children, and then how to clear that in the body is what I work with people on. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be like trauma with a capital T, like, you're the child of somebody who was in the Holocaust, like that level of trauma, but any sort of really deeply held emotional patterns or limiting beliefs or stories where like something wasn't working in our life, like in our own life or in our ancestors' lives, where we took on some story about what was or wasn't possible, what is or isn't possible for us to create, to be, to do, and that's holding us back from really embodying the essence of who we are in this lifetime and really bringing forth what our gifts are into the world. And so the Taoist practices are working with coming back into the body with the breath, with sound, with internal alchemy meditation, connecting the heart and the womb. Most of my work is with women, and with that connection between the yang fire of the heart and the deep yin wisdom of the womb. And having just given birth, I'm especially tuned into this, of how the womb is designed to hold energy and, to carry a baby, to create new life. And then that can also be energetic too in what we're creating with our business or with artwork or just who we are here to be in the world. That's our creative sexual source energy that resides in the sacred womb space. And when we can connect deeply with that, we can clear out anything that's held there, let that go, let that compost back into the earth, and then cultivate the radiance of what we do want to be creating with that sexual source energy. And having just given birth, I'm also aware of how like the processes of our daily life can sometimes convolute that too. So if we have a lot of stagnation in our daily life, if our digestion is off, if we're carrying a lot of stuff that's stagnant in our intestines, then like that has to go first. We have to clear all of that out first before we can actually give birth. Like physically. That's what has to happen. Clear the shit out, then you can birth the baby. Like if there's shit in the way, like there's no room to create new life. And so, looking at that physically and then also energetically, like where are the things that we're holding that aren't serving us, that we're ready to compost, to let go, to send back into the earth, to transform, and knowing that like they're not bad, like they're part of the cycle. And that's something that I really support people to work on with compassion, because like we all have shit. It all needs to be composted. And then it goes back into the earth and it goes back into the cycle. And so it's really about being in harmony with the cycles of yin and yang, with like letting go and with creating. And feeling that in our bodies is so radically different than just understanding that mentally. So on the cellular level, I'm working with people in qigong practices, in breath work, and really tuning into what their bodies are feeling and sensing and saying, and really tuning into how to listen to that, how to have compassion for that and gentleness, and really feel into what is right in this moment, what needs to be let go in this moment, and how do we breathe through that? How do we ask for support with that? How do we receive support with that? Because a lot of the time that's hard.
Very hard. Like the gentleness, like as you're talking, it's kind of like these words that are coming to me are like shame. So often we shame ourselves, and
right.
We're not very compassionate. And we're wondering, why are we feeling this way? Why is my body doing this? Why is it that? And there's just so much kind of negativity kind of coming from so many directions internally that, yeah.
Yeah, and shame is one of the main things that I work with people on, especially if there's been trauma, especially if there's been sexual abuse, but also for other things, like even a lot of the time people can have shame around having health issues, around having been in an abusive relationship, like, oh, I picked that person. Well, yes, and like here you are now, you're learning something new, and that doesn't make you a bad person. Like it just means that you're here to be learning and growing, and this is your path of evolution. And so transforming that shame internally, bringing it to light, and being able to name it and acknowledge it, bringing it to light, noticing what it feels like in the body, because so often, like if we feel that, we start to shut down. But if we can come into the body and actually feel what's there and really tune in to what that's about, and whether that's helping us in this moment or not, and to have compassion for that, then we allow it to soften. We allow it to open to the possibility of transformation. Whereas if we're not feeling it, if we're trying to shut it down and like just stay up here, above the diaphragm, like all the trauma stuff gets stuffed below the diaphragm. But if we're up here and we're trying to ignore it, and we're trying to just be in the positive love and light all the time, and we're like, oh, I don't have any shame, then we can't transform it. Then we don't give it room. And so part of the Taoist way of looking at that is to balance the yin and yang, is to notice that it's okay to have those quote unquote negative emotions, and we can work with them and transform them. And it's all just energy. We can keep it transforming. When yin and yang are together in that sacred cycle of life, when they're conjoined, that's what creates life. And as they start to separate, that's what leads to death. When yin and yang come together, we make a baby. When, spirit comes into matter, we have life. And then as they start to dissolve and get farther apart, we develop all sorts of symptoms. And eventually, when yin and yang separate, that's when we die. I know, I think Michelle is talking in the summit about aging. And so it's kind of like to to be in harmony with yin and yang is to be on that path of life, is to be continuing to create life and health and well-being. And then if we stop doing that, then we go into like the aging patterns. And that shows up, you know, physically a lot of the time in menopause, when there's like hot flashes and all sorts of stuff that comes up. And then there's like, and so that happens if a lot of the time, if we've been burning the candle at both ends earlier in our lives, if we were putting a lot of effort, like outward yang effort into what we're doing, like excess yang is prioritized in our society, and then it depletes the yin. And so we don't have enough comfort with the beingness of yin. We don't get enough rest. We don't really let ourselves rest in our worthiness. And that's where the transformation of shame comes around, is into resting in our worthiness, into being with our yin essence of who we are, that we're worthy of abundance, of love, of creativity, just for being alive. And that yin essence can then, you know, as we deepen our connection with that in our womb, with our heart, then we can bring that into the world in what we want to be creating, an inspired action that's rooted in the yin, that then comes out into yang action, doing this creativity. But if it's not rooted in the yin, then we can burn out, and then we get all these symptoms of burnout. And then, you know, sometimes I talk about this with people, and then they're like, "Oh, guilty," and then they have a lot of shame around having like burned the candle at both ends all through college. That's not useful, you know. And so, like, still having compassion for that and being able to come back into our, like, where we are now. Like, we didn't know all those things then, and we still have this opportunity to come back into our bodies, into deeper compassion and gentleness and self-love and self-trust. I feel like is the more important thing, is to come back into that wisdom. The water energy in Chinese medicine transforms from fear into wisdom, and really deepening into that resource within ourselves, and cultivating that. Qigong practices, the womb work with the jade egg practices I teach are really helpful in tapping into that wisdom and really listening to our bodies, so that we can be deeply aligned internally and can feel what it is that we need in this moment, and forgive ourselves for whatever it is that got us here. If it's a mess, you know, like let that go, let that transform, and tune in to what is here now, and where, like, what we're needing now, where to go from here, rooted from this place of our inner wisdom, of cultivating that inner resource, so that we're not relying just on the external stuff, like whatever the doctor tells us, or, you know, what this one person says I should be eating, but to come into our bodies and really tap into what's true here and now. And that's the deeper healing, I think, that happens with the Taoist practices, to really come into here and now.
It's that whole really literally being quiet, being still. It's not easy for many, especially within our culture. It's very busy. It's very moving. It's very, and actually taking that time to breathe, to listen, to get past the monkey mind, which is inevitably, I don't know, you tell me, but I'm thinking it inevitably happens. I'm learning how to really get past that and know that, okay, it might happen, but it's lasting for shorter periods of time, to then be able to get to the stillness, to then be able to listen.
Yeah, and it, like, you know, it doesn't have to be for long. Like, there's not a I'm I want people to be gentle with themselves in the process. Like there's little bits of, okay, this is how we can tune in to this wisdom, and if that's for a few seconds, that's great. And especially when I'm working with moms, like that's all you need. That's all you've got is a few seconds. And so the ability to tap into that, to know that resource, that wisdom, that place of depth, of stillness is always there, that we can access it, even if we're not accessing it all the time, because we're human, that's always there. And so when I teach the practices that I do with the womb work, with the Qigong and the breath, it's about coming back into that awareness so that it's easier to access. We're not trying to, be blissfully enlightened all the time. We're just like wanting to have an easier access to that resource, so that when things come up, we can pause, we can take a breath, we can remember, I have the resource within me in this moment to meet whatever this crazy tantrum is that my toddler's having, or to meet like whatever the crazy energy is of this election, or whatever is going on in the world, that we have the resource within ourselves to meet this moment. And if we can't tap into that deeply within ourselves, then we spin out. Then we go into all kinds of anxiety, and our nervous system gets hijacked into the stress response. And guess what? When we draw on the adrenals and have high cortisol levels, that depletes the yin further, and then it gets harder, and it's this whole cycle. But we can counteract that with these practices, and it doesn't have to take a long time. And so that's and you can. I have some clients, I think Sylvia might be in here, and she like does her qigong with her tree all the time, and it's beautiful and gorgeous and nourishing. And like she's at a point, or she has been recently, where she has the time and energy and enthusiasm to do that. And then I also have clients who are moms who are super busy, and like they just want to get through the day a little more easily, and like just tap into themselves a little bit more quickly, because that's all they can do sometimes. And so being able to do that and building the skills, like the qigong and breath work and the jade egg practices, are really about building our skill. Qigong translates as energy skill. So it's like, here we have all this energy, and then we want to have more skill at working with it and moving it. And when we have that skill, then we don't have to be afraid of anything that comes up. Like, it's not that fear doesn't show up, but we don't have to be afraid of being in fear, because we know how to work with it. We don't have to be afraid of anxiety, because we know how to work with it. We don't have to be afraid of getting angry, because we know how to work with it. And we can tune into that in our bodies, so that we have these embodied ways of working with energy that are nourishing, that help it to soften and move and flow through and complete cycle of yin and yang. And then, like, as it moves through, then we can create more of what we do want, which is probably not to be really angry. It's like, to have more peace, to have more connection, to go from a sense of shame to worthiness, to go from a sense of lack, of not being enough, of not having enough, to a trust in the abundance of the universe, to trust that we have what we need in this breath. We have what we need within our bodies in this deep sense of resource. And to go from a sense of isolation, which often comes if there's been trauma, or especially this year when a lot of people are really isolated, to be able to tap into a sense of larger connection, within ourselves. If we can connect within ourselves first, it's a lot easier to have the connections with other people, with the planet, with all of life force energy, and we can be in that sense of connection with ease and grace, and we can drop into that more and more quickly. as we clear the past trauma, as we start to work with the nervous system to settle, as we practice tuning into the womb, into this deeper center of our power, we can be in power with our bodies, with our deepest wisdom and resource, and not be like up here in our heads trying to have power over our bodies, or stuck in victimhood feeling like, you know, this person out there has power over me. And when we come back into our own power, we can create what we're here to create in the world, and we can be really deeply alive and aligned in ourselves, and things start to show up. You know, like we start to have more fulfilling relationships, we start to cultivate more abundance, we start to create more beauty in our work, in our connections, in our family life. And that's really been my experience in the past number of years, from the birth of my son almost 7 years ago to the birth of my daughter now, has been such a journey in seeing how powerful these practices are to radically change my entire life, from being quite miserable and triggered by lots of things to being really happy and peaceful and really thriving in all the ways. So
I love what you're saying about like, to me, it's like trusting yourself. It's finding, it's trusting, it's empowering, it's all of these things that you've been saying, to know that you have the answers, and or that you can seek the answers, that you don't have to go to all of these outside sources and be searching, because that's when we get kind of like that, like gripping, like, oh, I have to ask this person, I have to look this up, and I have to find. And it's not to say that there aren't times for that, but when we really do take the time to be still, like you're saying, and trust ourselves, to move inward, to look inward, then there's this empowering feeling of, I do have answers, and I am connected, and all of these things, which then moves outward. It's pretty beautiful.
Right. And first we have to get better at feeling what's going on in our bodies. And you know, when we look at what's happening in school systems and for, you know, years now, like we're taught to ignore our bodies. We're taught to like be like, sit at your desk, answer the questions, etc. I'm thrilled to be homeschooling now, for partly for this reason, because we're told to shut down our inner wisdom, and that our body wisdom isn't valid. And so to come into that, and not, and like to then to be able to differentiate between what is the body wisdom that is really wise, and what is the body wisdom that's like reacting to a trigger. and so part of the practices that I teach are about how to differentiate between those, so that we can notice, okay, this is a thinking swirling pattern, this is an emotional response, and then what's the deeper truth that's beneath that? What's the deeper truth of what I'm eating, of, you know, what's the underlying story there? Is that true? How do we transform that? What is a deeper truth that could become a new story, that could really open into my greater potential, that could support my thriving? And not just my thriving, but the Taoist principle is also in the thriving of the whole. And so to be in we space, as my partner and I call it, to trust that we all can be thriving. Like he can be thriving, my son can be thriving, I can be thriving, and like our thriving doesn't take away from anybody else's thriving. And so that's also kind of the young capitalist idea, is that like there's only so much, like not everybody can thrive. That's not true. It doesn't have to be true. And so tuning into that within ourselves and our family circle first, and then letting that expand outward into how we show up in the world, in what allows all of us to thrive. And so right now I can feel how there's, you know, all these systems disintegrating, and there's this opportunity to create new ones that are opening to all of our thriving. And And the more that we can embody that within ourselves, the easier those systems will be to create in the larger world, like in those concentric circles coming out from, internally in my own body to my family, to my, next larger circle, to the larger community, and how that can contribute to all of our thriving in a way that is actually sustainable and regenerative, that has the yin and yang balance. For all of us. And so that's the larger picture of my work. But it starts within, because if we can't do that within ourselves, then it's like we can't do that work in the world sustainably. I see so many activists get really burnt out after a number of years because they're not tending to in here. But if we tend to ourselves, and we cultivate the support networks, then we can actually make the changes that we want to see in the world. By embodying that first, by connecting with others, by really tuning into what's possible in the yin and yang, and in the larger we space of what it means to be thriving, what it means to co-create, what it means to be working with life, with chi energy, and skillfully with the awareness of the elements, of the natural ebb and flow of energy, of gentleness, of trust, and of trusting in ourselves and in the possibility that there is all this life force energy that wants to create, and that nature wants us to thrive. And so deepening into that wisdom in ourselves and in our communities, and I tune into that internally each day, and it makes a world of difference in my ability to show up in my family and my work, and it feels good. There's the getting better at feeling first, and then we start to feel better. Whereas if we're just focusing on feeling better, then we can ignore the other feelings that are actually the signposts leading us towards what will help us feel better in a more sustainable way.
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was just looking at that and thinking, and this is we focus on, I want to feel better, I want to feel better, I want to feel better. That's it. And that's here. It's not here.
Right. There's discomfort, with being uncomfortable. And so part of my online course goes into how to be with discomfort. And, it's okay to be uncomfortable sometimes. Sometimes the baby has gas and she cries. And that is valid. And we can support her in that, but it's not bad. And so there's just letting go of the judgment about discomfort, letting go of the judgment about darkness, about pain, about, all these things, and trusting that they're part of a larger picture, and tuning into how to work with that to be more generative.
Love, this is such important work. And since we're almost at the end, Jem, can you please tell us how people can connect with you and find out more about all that you are offering in this amazing way?
Yeah. So I'll put the links below this, but my website is nourishingalchemy.love. And so the main course that I'm referencing here is my Thriving Beyond Trauma Foundations of Sacred Feminine Embodiment course, and that's a 12-week program, but you have access forever. You're not going to do it all in 12 weeks, and it's meant to support your long-term growth and thriving, and then within that, there's also an option to upgrade to private coaching with me, because especially if there's trauma. Trauma happens in relationship, and so healing also happens in relationship. And so having somebody external to be in relationship with as we're navigating exactly how to utilize these practices is really helpful. So I'll put the links for that below. And then I also have some free groups, free Facebook group also called Thriving Beyond Trauma, and another one called Thriving Families. And there's also a mini course on my website for free that is just a few of the basic principles and practices as an introduction. And that's called Embodying Courage in Challenging Times. So I'll put those links down below.
Wonderful, Jem. And just so you know, there's been a lot of wonderful feedback. Thank you, Jem. I learned a lot from you today. How to be comfortable with discomfort, embodying this, and then reach out skillfully. There's just a lot of, you'll go back and read, but a lot of positive comments. So thank you so much for all that you offer into this world, for all that you do. And thank you for being here when I know that your day is very busy.
It's actually very sweet. There's just lots of snuggles.
Good. And thank you everybody who tuned in and watching the replay, and continue watching this summit and being inspired every day. So thank you everybody, and Jem, have an incredible rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Bye everybody.